The daddy-daughter dance means so much to me because my dad means so much to me. It's our special day every year when we get to dress up and dance and just have fun. I like helping my dad get dressed. He thinks he looks cool, but I show him what cool is when we get to the dance floor.
My job is to aware you, fully loaded, prepare you for all of the above that I'm never letting get near you. But still in all, give you every advantage I found. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down. Cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
My message to any dad, man, first off, know that, it is a hard job, but it's the greatest job in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't change anything about it. Everything you're doing from here on out, if it didn't have purpose before, now it has purpose. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. Just be a dad.
Welcome to another episode of Dad is Not a Dime. My name is Ishmael, changing the narrative for men of color fatherhood, as well as changing the narrative on the things I care about. And today, I have a special guest with me. As a person that loves history, I'm truly honored to have this guest on. I always tell all my guests their time is our greatest commodity. And for this guest to spend her commodity with me means the entire world to me. I have the one and only Dr. Karen L. Cox with me. Thank you for coming on with me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's nice to be with you.
My first question, actually, that was my first question. My next question, because I'm all about mental health and I'm an advocate about it. And my question to you, how's your heart at this moment?
I think my heart's pretty good. I think that I have decided, that, the ways I want to share my expertise, I want to do it in order to help people and help people understand. And so I'm good. I retired from academia in 24, but I have not retired in terms of the things I'm doing and writing and talking and doing those little TikTok videos or Instagram reels. All those things I think are good. I feel good about doing that.
Definitely. And my philosophy is, I got this from a quote, is it's not about being a great person, it's about being a great ancestor. And so I think as citizens of the world, I think it's a privilege that, we have so much to give and we should just give and give without expecting anything in return. Because what you offer when it comes to history is so much information that we're in a current time where you see this current administration deleting a lot of that history.
Yeah.
And so the work you do is significant to my generation and the next generation who wants to learn about the past. And so again, I commend you for the work you do. So before we get into the conversation, just like talk to me about what got you into history and your love for history.
Yeah. I think from a lot of people, some teacher had an impact. And so I remember I first developed a love for history in the 8th grade from a teacher I had. And I didn't have the best teachers in high school, but I didn't lose my love for it. And so I think that I've always, when I got to college and they said, you're going to have to declare a major. And I hadn't even thought about that and I got this letter in the mail when they send you real letters and not emails. And it said, you have to declare a major. So I thought to myself, what do I love the most? And it's history. And I'm very passionate about it. I love I think that I loved thinking about the kind of history that we would call grassroots history, about everyday people. Like, you always get the lessons about, people in power, but the kind of history I've always been interested in is history from the ground up, and about the way people, lived their lives around me. And that's why, because I live in the South, I also wanted to study the South. And so, because I wanted to know more about where I lived and about the people who were my neighbors.
Definitely, definitely. And before we get into the conflict, just tell the audience who may not know you, give them a little background of your credentials a little bit.
Okay, well, I have a PhD in history, but I went to the University of Southern Mississippi. I went to the Deep South to do this, and I've written some books. I've written about 4 books, working on a 5th one now. Most of the books have covered Southern history and culture, but specifically issues around Confederate memory and memorialization, Confederate symbols, and things like that. And this concept of the lost cause, which is the narrative that white Southerners developed after the Civil War to try to make sense of their own defeat. And there's a lot of false narratives within that, the lost cause. And so, so that's a brief overview of my background. And I've written a lot of op-eds on this too. So you could find my work in the New York Times or on CNN online. I write public pieces for the same reason I've been doing TikToks, which is to reach a broader audience. Because it doesn't matter if I write something and only 5 other historians or whoever reads it. I need to get that information out to as broad an audience as possible. And I think that's because I think that way because I'm a first-gen student, college student. My family members never got to go to college. My parents finished high school, but my grandparents never made it out of junior high school. 2 of my grandparents only graduated 4th grade. And so I think that I do it for them too, for people like them and how can I take what I know and break it down for people so that they understand, what this is about, whatever it might be.
And I think what you do is phenomenal work because you make it digestible for people to understand. Because I know sometimes when you have historians, they try to go into this high intellectual conversation about history. At the end of the day, people just want something chewable and digestible that they can understand and it makes sense. And again, I thank you what you do with TikTok. I know you start doing stuff on Instagram as well too. So
Yeah,
again,
I'm just sharing my TikToks on Instagram, so it's basically the same stuff.
But I thank you for what you do because I truly appreciate that. Because people need to know when it comes to the lost cause and the Confederates and how the conversation about the Confederates change over time of how they become this sympathetic character in the story of America. So let's get into the conversation. I love your thought process when you said that the Confederates lost the battle, but they didn't lose the war. Can you dive into what that means to the audience who may not know?
Right. So, well, I say, historians will say that, the South suffered military defeat, but they won the peace. So what they mean by that is they won the peace because their narrative, white Southerners' narrative of what the war was about, or what slavery was about the Reconstruction was about, all these things, that narrative ends up winning out. for most people. And the reason I say that is while it is a Southern phenomenon, and it influences generations of white Southerners, it also gets out of the South. It influences people outside of the region, and in ways they might not even recognize. So concepts, for example, like, oh, the war was only fought about states' rights and not slavery. That concept of the war having been fought over states' rights is one that, like, you still hear today. And it's not just coming from the South. It's coming from politicians outside of the South. And so that is the way in which the South wins the peace. It wins it through this narrative and in a rewriting of the history of the war. So that's it. I mean, they've rewritten it for most people. Yes, I'm a historian, I research and I understand where it's all coming from. But for everyday people who don't do the deep dive, they're getting that version of the past. And so you'll hear politicians on the right say, oh, yeah, the war was just fought over states' rights. They'll repeat that narrative. That comes from the lost cause. That comes from white Southerners trying to defend themselves. And the way white Southerners would have said it after the war, it would be like, our lost cause really is a just cause, a sacred cause. Then if it's just and sacred, then to them it's still viable. It's still something that they believe in, and they surely believe in it. They didn't give up on that. Just because there's this book that I've talked about in one of my recordings called The Lost Cause. That's where we get the term. And it was written by this guy named Edward Pollard, and he was from Richmond, and he was a journalist, and he wrote a book called The Lost Cause. It was published in 1866. At the end of that book, he kind of summarizes what becomes the thinking of people who subscribe to the lost cause. He said, essentially, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but he says, the only thing that the war decided was the end of slavery and military defeat. Anything that the war did not decide, the Southern people still cling to. He meant white Southerners. And what they still cling to, and he said it didn't decide, he said Negro equality. It did not decide that citizenship or that they could vote, right? Now, he's published this in 1866. Of course, then we'll get the 14th Amendment that does give citizenship and the 15th Amendment that does give Black men a right to vote. So he's saying this before, but he's saying he represents white thinking about freed people. And so and I think this is right. It's like, just because Reconstruction gave us those two amendments does not mean that they accepted it. And of course they fought it tooth and nail. And they were figuring out ways in which to push back against that. So that by 1890, you get what's called the Mississippi Plan, which was a rewriting of the state constitution that says that basically disenfranchised Black men. It put in things like, a grandfather clause, an understanding clause, a poll tax, all kinds of things that would basically gut the 15th Amendment. And former Confederate state after state started passing a similar state constitution, so that by 1901, all the states of the former Confederacy have eliminated basically the 15th Amendment. It still exists in our Constitution, but they've made it toothless. So, yeah. So I don't know where this all started from, but this is lost cause thinking, because lost cause thinking means we don't believe in those things and we're going to push back against it. And that actually extends to the North. Please know, it's like, there have been times in our history where people say, that's a Southern problem. That's a white South does that. We don't do that. But there was absolutely segregation in the North. Jim
And I
Crow
think,
existed in the North,
yeah, I
right?
think it's important. It's important because that was going to lead to my next question: is that you had the North that want to go back to normalcy, and that to me is another dog whistle term. It's like, what do you mean by normalcy? Are you talking about the normalcy of the the original document? Where it said that Black people weren't a part of that document in its intent. So I just want you to elaborate more, because again, that's to me when I think about normalcy. When I hear today politicians like today Democrat talk about we need to go to normalcy. Like, what do you mean by normalcy?
Well, I mean, first of all, in our original Constitution, not only did it not include people of color, of course, at that point they're enslaved, or even freed people at that point. It didn't include women, and it didn't include white men who didn't own a certain amount of property. So a lot of people are left out of the system. Okay. But I think what counts as normalcy after the Civil War and where the lost cause is concerned, normalcy for these people is about making sure that white supremacy stays intact. That they want to protect the racial status quo. And they do it, if not through government means, they do it through violence. That's definitely the way it was in the late 19th and early 20th century. I mean, there was an epidemic of lynching in the 1890s. And it goes on beyond that, of course. And of course, we see, they're still doing that. So the normalcy I understand what you're saying, what it sounds like to you.
Right.
What I think it is a way of saying we want to maintain the racial status quo. We want to maintain this white hierarchy. White men are at the top, white women, and then, Black men and women. I mean, it has to go in this order. And it's an idea of this kind of a weird idea of paternalism, like they know better how to to do what's best for everybody else, but it takes away the rights of people in doing that. So I think normalcy is, when we think about that, it's about saying, okay, what they think is normal, white men, white leaders, white supremacists, and that includes women too, because they're not, white women too.
Yeah.
They want that back under, want to tamp down any kind of racial progress and keep it tamped down so they can control it. That's normalcy for them. Because once people start protesting or resisting or whatever it is, then, it's gotten out of their control. And that, and that can go beyond race. That could be about the LGBT community, or it could be about women's rights. And it definitely has to do with immigrants in this moment. But see, what's interesting is like the things that they're saying in this moment, like some of the people coming out of the White House, the things that they say about immigrants are things they were saying about immigrants in the 1890s. It's real old.
Yeah.
And they're trying to bring it back. It's like, I say they're partying like it's 1891.
Seriously, no,
Or
you're absolutely
1899,
right. No, you're absolutely right, because the gentleman that is architecting the immigration policy is Stephen Miller, and
Yes.
he's known as a white supremacist. Like, he's like,
yeah, he says a
he
lot of
brazen
that
it.
stuff.
He
He
brazen it.
says some of the worst things. It's vile. He's a vile person. But this is, you know what it is? It's like if you dehumanize people, and that's what they're doing, and that's what white Southerners did after the Civil War. If you dehumanize people, then it's an easy step for them to disenfranchise, to take away rights, or in the case of immigrants, to try to send them to another country or throw them in a prison. Yeah. I mean, mass incarceration is part of that, right? It's like you've already dehumanized people. Now we're going to put you in prison. And that happened, of course, to Black people and Latino people. Now it's, other kinds of other immigrants from different countries are experiencing that because they're throwing them into prisons too. They're incarcerating them because they don't think they're human beings. Trump uses the words like dogs, or these people or Miller. They talk about them in non-human terms. And I think that, of course, we have a long history of that.
Yeah, especially when he uses the phrase, when he says they're poisoning the blood. This is like terminology that was used in Germany, but also this has been used in America too. When it comes to like immigrants, people of color in general, it's like
that was in the late 19th century, part of the ways in which the justification by former Confederates to disenfranchise Black men is to suggest that that they are a threat to women, white women, and they're brutish, that they're animalistic, and so they have to be brought under control. And once you dehumanize people, then these are the things that you have no problem doing making the next step, whether it's violence or incarceration.
No, definitely. And I think that's important that you add that element to the conversation, because that creates policy. And that's the legacy of the lost cause, is the policy that dehumanizes a group of people. And now what you do is you put it in lawyer language to make it legal to justify the act. Or like anytime you're going on a campaign, you got to make the other feels like a villain. That played a major role in the Reconstruction. And then when you get into like I'm jumping history, but when you go into like Ronald Reagan's campaign and talking about the welfare queen,
yes,
or they it's the same playbook.
That's a racist dog whistle too, to refer to them women that way. And also Reagan, he kicked, where he kicked off his campaign was in Neshoba County, Mississippi, close to where the civil rights workers were murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And he kicks it off by talking about states' rights, which feeds right into the lost cause, the people who still hold fast to that in the South. But it's also appealing to people outside of the South, of course. It's also an appealing thing. They'll say, but states' rights is one of these things. It's like, they believe in it when it's good for them. When it's not good for them, they're okay with the federal government telling people what to do. It's like, yeah, they want to pass let's say, a federal ban on abortion. They're all right with that. If a state said, no, we don't want that, they were like, no. So they don't believe about states' rights when it comes to the things that they don't want to happen, right? It's like, it's only a matter of convenience.
No, definitely. And then also, I think a critical group that played a role in changing the narrative of the Confederates is the Daughters of the Confederates. Can you talk about how they influence the perception of the Confederates?
Yeah. So the United Daughters of the Confederacy is a group that was like founded in 1894. So this is 30 years later, right? 30 years after the Civil War. And their goals were really broad. They had an agenda to build more monuments. They had an agenda to influence the way people are educated and rewriting of history and all of that. So one of the things I always say this about the group, the daughters, is that they were not necessarily. Some people will say, "Oh, it's just about heritage and remembering your ancestors." It might be that about this much of it. The rest of it is really a forward-looking idea on the part of those women, because they're thinking we got to make sure that the next generation and the generation after them and the generation after that learns the narrative as we want them to learn that narrative. We got to teach these kids what we believe. And so in that way, they were future looking. They weren't just looking at the past. And I think that's really important because, they're saying, okay, we got to lay this foundation so that these white children in the South, in their public schools, are learning that Confederate soldiers are heroes, that slavery wasn't the cause of the war, that the Ku Klux Klan of Reconstruction were heroes as well. And so you learn all that, and then, generation after generation is learning that narrative. By the time you get into the 1950s and 60s, that is like imprinted on them. And so they think that way. They think, okay, any effort by the federal government to institute civil rights is like an invasion of the South, like similar to the Civil War, right? This is federal intervention. And so they want, to push back against that. And they're, and then they're all screaming about states' rights,
Right.
because it's like, oh, the South needs to be able to determine its own fate. Well, left to their own devices, the white South wasn't going to do anything to help Black citizens in their states. They weren't going to do it. They were going to remain segregated. The schools would be underfunded. Everything else would remain segregated. And, so that what the daughters had started teaching people gets passed on generation after generation after generation. And it still could be found in textbooks in the 1970s. So, but in today, we see people trying to play around with textbooks today, rewriting the past and saying, well, let's focus on the founding fathers. Let's not talk about the bad stuff. Let's not talk about slavery. Let's not talk about Jim Crow. We're not going to talk about these things, anything that makes white people look bad. So if we do, and so it's coming around again, right? They're going to try to, and the reason they're doing it is because they want to create future generations of people who think like they do. That is exactly what the UDC did.
No, and I think they are when you think about the Daughters of the Confederate, I think they're now the Moms for Liberty.
Yeah, I've talked about that a little bit. There's a little bit of a difference, and it in the early 20th century, when the daughters were really active and very successful in an organization, they basically could do whatever they wanted to do. Right. They could put the books in the schools. They could go to this. They say, well, everybody kind of thought like they did. If you were a member, you were a white person in the South, you agreed with whatever the UDC said and did. So they weren't like actually, there wasn't anybody really pushing back against that.
Right.
And then, but now they would get, but then they would go to, if they wanted, let's say they want to build a monument on a courthouse lawn, they would go and get their money from the local government. They would, send somebody in, go, to represent them, and it would end up being that maybe the county commission or the city council would give money toward the monument, but they just handed that money over because they were in agreement with what the UDC was doing. Now, if you fast forward to what the Moms for Liberty are doing now, they have they do get pushback, but they're like attacking school boards. But they have better funding because they have political action committees that help fund their work. The politicians on the right are, basically vying to get their endorsement. The GOP presidential candidates were vying for their support. But they do things like they are concerned about, what kind of narrative is going to be taught in the classroom. And it's very much a narrative of history that is focused on white founding fathers and erases the worst parts of our past that really often have to do with race.
Yeah.
And I say to, people all the time, I was like, I want my history, warts and all.
Yeah.
Don't keep me from learning. Don't give me this like soft-pedaled version of history. I want all of it because that's what history is. It's enriching, and it's like it helps you to understand how we get to where we are. And or, if you were looking at the present moment, it's like what, there were precedents that got, to all of this. This is not a new thing.
Right.
But if you like take away from children the opportunity to learn the full spectrum of history, you're not teaching them history. You're offering propaganda.
No, definitely. And I love this conversation. I want to talk to you for like hours if I could. I know you people need you. They need your wisdom. They need your information. But my last question I want to ask you, because I want to draw a timeline, right? You had the end of the Civil War, Reconstruction. You had Jim Crow, and then from Jim Crow, I'm going to leap. I would say, you could say I'm wrong, but the Heritage Foundation is tied to the Confederate legacy because of the policy. And what makes the Heritage Foundation different is they have the ear of the executive branch. So a lot of those policies that's being implemented is implemented on a federal level. So I know I kind of put everything at you at once. That do you believe that the Heritage Foundation is a legacy of the Confederates?
Is it a legacy of let's say, I would put it like this, is it a legacy of the lost cause, which
Yes.
is this ideology?
Yes.
I haven't really thought about that a lot. I think that there are ways, absolutely, in which it mirrors that, because there's a sense of wanting to restore white supremacy, to be in control of the narrative of the past. Because when you control the narrative of the past, then you really got a lot of control, because then in and and this is the thing. Yeah, they do have the ear. I mean, look, what's his name? Vaught, the guy he's the author of 2025, the Project 2025, who came from the Heritage Foundation. He seems to have more control than almost anybody in the branch. I mean, it seems that way to me. Now, the Heritage Foundation is currently going through sort of a blow up, because there are people leaving that organization. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think in some ways, the Heritage Foundation is a legacy of the 1990s, when Pat Buchanan came around. But see, Pat Buchanan embodies the legacy of the lost cause.
Right.
Because he was like, I found this thing, and I didn't even know this, but he was made an honorary member. Well, he actually has a Confederate ancestor, so he was made a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans in the 1990s. So that, I think there is, I tell you where, and we haven't talked about this, and I'll just try to sum this up quickly, is that there is an element of Christian nationalism within the lost cause.
Yes.
The idea that this is a sacred cause, that we were, and there are people in the 1990s, as a group called the League of the South, that now calls itself the Southern Nationalist League. They absolutely believe in a Christian nation, Christian nationalism. And I think that is where the Heritage Foundation and that link up. They link up over this concept of Christian nationalism. But it's a Christian nationalism that is led by white men.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. That is so true.
And that's scary stuff right there. And not just every white man, only a few, right? It's a small group of people that want all that control.
And you see it in their voting habits. You see it in policies across different parts of the state. You see it everywhere. But Professor Cox, thank you for coming on. How can people find you? Where can people buy your books? The floor is yours.
Well, I just created a YouTube channel.
Okay.
I just started it. All I have up there right now is an introduction. It's called Under Karen
I'm
L.
just
Cox.
happy. Yes.
Under my name. I'm going to try. I'm going to give it a shot. Tad is much better at this stuff than I am. But people can find my books on what is it called? Bookshop.org. I've tried to do the independent ones, right? Bookshop.org. And you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Karen Cox Historian. Both places is the same. I'm trying to keep it same across the platform so people don't get confused.
Yes. But I appreciate all the links will be in the description below. Please buy her books. Please support her on YouTube. If you watch this video, the link to her YouTube channel will be there, even though she only has one video.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
You're working on it.
I'm going to start
working
uploading stuff. I think I might do some longer conversations about some of the things we talked about today, how does this thing get started, and and morph into what we're seeing today, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
definitely. My best advice for you: keep it short.
I do. So far, I've been keeping it short. I've been keeping it most of my little TikToks are less than 3 minutes. A few of them go up to 5, but I try to keep it.
Keep it short because it keeps people who want more and more and more. Because again, we live in this age where people got so much to do.
I appreciate that, but now you got this 38-minute video right now. What are you going to do about that?
I'm playing the full thing because people need to know. So if they're on their lunch break, they can go on their half an hour lunch break and watch the video when they're at work. But it's
Sounds
important that we
good.
get. It's important that people get that information. But Professor Cox, thank you for coming on. This has been an amazing conversation here on the podcast. Like, subscribe, and we're out of here. Love and peace.